Now at last, on this world.
Hey, cuties. Today's episode is gonna get a little bit crispy. Might ruffle some feathers. Could maybe raise an eyebrow. I hold very strong opinions on pornography. I could go on a long tirade of the morality and degeneracy of it all, but that would go against the grain of groovy biology's structure and format. We'll keep it groovy. We'll keep it biology. We're diving straight into the biological aspect of what pornography does to your body. Don't worry, lads, this isn't going to become me telling you to rely on cornflakes and graham crackers. Everyone has urges, that's completely natural. How a person manages said urges is the problem. Between everyone's earballs sits about 3 pounds of delicious gray and white matter with microstructures and neural networks so complex we don't fully understand them just yet. This skull goo, however, can be examined relatively closely. Firstly and forcefully, we'll address the elephant in the room, the aspect of addiction. This fanciest of journal articles, written in 2013 by Dr. Donald Hilton Jr., from the Department of Neurosurgery within the University of Tejas, has some choice words about the addiction of pornography, focusing largely on behavioral aspects. Dr. Hilton opens his paper by thoroughly exploring the definitions of what makes certain habits a genuine addiction. He later describes pornography as an ideal laboratory to study how the human brain handles drive, pleasure, and the chemical reward system linking them. A peculiar term I enjoyed in this study was supranormal stimulus, coined by Nicholas Tinbergen in 1951, and used to describe limitless novelty, something now casually accessible thanks to the very own internet. As an arthropod lover, I must bring up that the Tinbergen study being referenced utilized artificial moths and butterflies to change the behavior of their biological counterparts. In their studies, male moths and butterflies were abnormally attracted to the visually enhanced females. This was lightheartedly compared to artificial breast implants. This article focuses mainly on whether or not the addiction exists, as many argue it does not. Looking at you, Jezebel and BuzzFeed. Dr. Hilton compares established studies, definitions, and bias to explore how the compulsive sexual nature of pornography walks like an addiction, quacks like an addiction, and rewires your circuitry like an addiction. But socially, it is slightly tricky to define as an addiction. Using comparisons to gambling and food addictions, you can feel Dr. Hilton saying, "Look, you know what's up, I know what's up." Moving on, let's dive and splish a splash into a slightly more recent piece written in 2016 that focuses more on the brain itself. One with many authors, including one Dr. Koob. Dr. Koob and friends conducted a study on just what makes a clinically defined addiction and how addictions rewire our brainy bits during their development. Their observations were based on substance abuse cases, reinforcing ideas by using what society as a whole can agree is in fact addictive. This article lays some foundations by establishing the 3 primary recurring stages of addiction development and the brain activity involved. The 3 stages being binge and intoxication, withdrawal, and lastly, preoccupation anticipation. The binge stage describes a sort of Pavlovian state of being, where the brain is releasing relatively large amounts of dopamine that cements an unnatural associative conditioning. This conditioning leads to an ingrained craving that persists long after use has ceased, leading us to withdrawal. The stage called withdrawal negative effect describes how the drive-reward system the brain is used to is subverted, leading to a person's motivations being warped. To quote the article directly, in fact, clinical and preclinical studies have shown that drug consumption triggers much smaller increases in dopamine levels in the presence of addiction than in its absence. This attenuated release of dopamine renders the brain's reward system much less sensitive to stimulation by both drug-related and non-drug-related rewards. As a result, Persons with addiction no longer experience the same degree of euphoria from a drug as they did when they first started using it. It is for this same reason that persons with addiction often become less motivated by everyday stimuli that they had previously found to be motivating and rewarding. The follow-up to this statement discusses how the dopamine-saturated amygdala and basal forebrain are now more reactive to stress, creating an anti-reward system fueled by disproportionate corticotropin release factor and dynorphin. Dysphoria is often associated with this type of withdrawal, making me believe it is the anti-fedora. Dysphoria? Dysedora? A bit of collateral side effect is this has been reported to amplify anxiety and anxiety-induced episodes. The third primary stage, preoccupation and anticipation, a stage where the prefrontal cortex regions have been modified far enough that executive processes, meaning decision-making, overarching compulsiveness, and motivations have been altered. The article goes on to describe the brain disease model this creates, but supplements with models for prevention and possible treatment. Another 2016 article by Dr. Harper and Dr. Hodgins studies university students directly, including both males and females. Though not quite as in-depth about the development of an addiction in general, this article directly tackles the idea of whether or not pornography is addicting. This section in question is even labeled, "Can we become addicted to internet pornography?" I really want to focus on this section, especially as it immediately dives right into the development of sexually driven brain stimulation. It excellently describes the portions of the brain developing and their reaction to viewing pornographic imagery. As a wee bit of a tangent, I must point out the article also introduces the term Coolidge Effect. That is defined by a biological phenomenon where males exhibit renewed sexual interest when a novel outlet or stimulus is introduced. This is brought up as a comparison, as those who chronically view pornography are no longer satiated with the material they have grown used to and must continue to seek out new material. This introduces a whole new aspect of addiction, where an individual's addiction isn't just fueled by desire, but the need to discover and collect novel material. Moving a bit back to the primary question of the study, we are presented with the findings that fMRI imaging tells us that there is a very specific neural network that reacts when a drug addict imbibes his narcotic, and this very same network reacts when someone addicted to pornography views the lewd materials. Though I gotta say, this paper certainly uses gentler wording than I would have by calling it problematic pornography use. To reinforce the findings of previously mentioned paper, this article describes just how the brain rewires itself in the development of an addiction. The article goes into some meaty detail, and I'd highly recommend checking it out, as it remains a very readable article. It won't trip up the layman reader with unfamiliar terminology. It's fairly similar to the previous article, but with a honed focus towards pornography specifically. Aside from discussing behavior changes and altered brain development, it dives into and displays data through excellent and clear-to-read tables. One of my favorite statements made here is, "Some problematic users have indicated they did not know that their use was causing them difficulties until they had stopped." Are line graphs and third-style brain imaging more your thing? This 2014 piece by Voon, Mole, and other academics uses just those very things to show what networks within the human brain are fired up when exposed to pornography. So it's addictive. So is nicotine. Why else should I worry about what pornography does to the body? Ha! Well, I'm glad you asked, because abnormal brain developments have further, indirect side effects. This 2015 Beyens article explores how the academic performances of adolescent males deteriorated over time, correlated with exposure. This niche 2014 article by Muses? This article dives into how exposure of sexually explicit material affects newlyweds. It negatively impacts the quality of trust and, satisfaction between newlyweds, while also gradually giving the male's overstimulated brain unrealistic expectations. To be fair, the article also states that pornography usage is reciprocally related, as males often turned to it during periods where relationship qualities decreased, creating a vicious cycle of dissatisfaction and relationship detriment. To build on those last two articles, this 2012 publications by Laya discusses how exposure to the lewds disrupts working memory capacity, that brand of memory vital for immediate perception and situational awareness. Though less in-depth than multiple brain scans, there was a distinct correlation between working memory dysfunction and pornographic exposure. I can only imagine being the test group for that kind of study, though. As for the fellows in the audience, you might be wondering if exposing your brain styles to porn piles might affect your umthondo wisizwe. There were two very recent studies conducted in 2019 by Snewski and Begovic that might interest you, if you want to keep your umthondo quite wisizwe. Snewski and friends use the phrase diminished sexual function. Though the entirety of this work is essentially a book, the link provided will take you to the site where there is a substantial amount of excerpts that study bodily dysfunction, losing control of the addiction because of the altered behavior, and the relationships involved. One of the provided testimonies describes where one man's umthondo was not so wisizwe, even after the use of specific medications. If a compiled book isn't your thing, a more traditionally scientific journal was produced. Begovic and friends further reinforced the statements made in the previous piece, discussing how chronic pornographic habits lead to and have led to PP problems in males. What this article does supplement with is a theoretical system of rebooting your brain's pleasure/reward system. Not only does it discuss the problem, but it provides a working theory on how to fix the most flaccid issue involved. And on a bit of an off note, I should point out that many of these pieces mention how the altering of the brain's circuitry leads to the user needing to find newer and more exotic material, back to that Coolidge Effect. Professor Cavaglion has an article exploring this further. Observations of addicts and testimonials demonstrate how habitual use can gradually build up a tolerance for the material. What was once considered risque and enticing becomes vanilla and less invigorating. The provided cases discuss an addict's need to escalate the explicit, violent, and strangeness of the material. This, of course, leads to dysfunctions when it comes to that person dealing with real-life relationships and tangible intercourse. If you want to learn more, I'd highly recommend checking out this page of compiled, peer-reviewed scientific journals put together by the eccentric naturalist on his very own .com. I'll place a link in the description. Also, feel free to check out his channel for insightful and regularly spicy commentary to get your noodle cooking. He's kind of a bigger fan of debate and engagement than I am. So if you want something a little more crispy and spicy, be sure to check out his listing in debates. Am I saying people who watch porn are inherently bad? Not at all. Am I saying pornography is detrimental to your health? Absolutely. So do your body a favor. Drink an extra glass of water, exercise, get a little bit of sunlight, and don't watch porn.
Let the record show that Mr. James really knows his pornography.
Oh, feel free to take your styles and piles to check out my video miles. This channel's just been up for a little over a year, but I'm thoroughly enjoying what's going on. So if you want to grow the audience, it would be a huge help to me and my college student budget. Oh, please, I'm so hungry. Oh.